So I got the incredible opportunity to play Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 ahead of its release, and I'm excited to share my first impressions with you. In this video, I'll give you a sneak peek into my first several hours of gameplay and what you can expect when the game launches on February 4th. I'll try to keep things as spoiler free as possible, focusing instead on the key differences between the first and second game, along with some gameplay footage and my thoughts on my experience so far. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is a direct continuation of the first game, Kingdom Come Deliverance, where you take control of Henry, the humble son of a blacksmith whose hometown of Skalitz is ravaged by Cuman invaders. After barely escaping with his life, Henry makes his way over to Rattay and starts working with some figures to restore the rightful king of Bohemia, King Wenceslas IV. Along the way, he meets powerful characters such as Sir Radzig, Sir Hanush, and of course his newfound best friend, Hans Capon. Towards the end of the first game, Hans and Henry take off for Trotsky Castle with a message for Otto von Bergau, wondering what his stance is on the ongoing war. The story of KCD2 opens up here, just a couple days after the events of the first. On the way, Henry and Hans are ambushed, and after barely making it out with their lives, Henry and Hans have to come up with a way to succeed in their mission. The first couple hours are really just served to teach you the in-game mechanics and catch you up with the events of the first game up to this point. Everything is briefly explained through some dialogue options, as well as some tutorials for the new in-game mechanics within combat, Farkle, stealth, and alchemy. It feels like Warhorse really put a large emphasis on making everything in the game be more accessible to players, whether they're new to the franchise or have thousands of hours within the first. Once completing the prologue, the map opens up to you within the town of Troskowitz, and you're able to start roaming around free in the huge map of Trotsky Castle. The gameplay itself is largely what you would expect from Kingdom Come Deliverance, but everything just feels a little better. I haven't really had that feeling yet where I'm fighting against the controls trying to get Henry to do what I want him to do. That being said, the controls have gone through some changes, and with myself playing on controller, I'll briefly go over which ones stuck out to me the most. Starting with the directional buttons, pushing down still opens your inventory, and pushing up still opens your map. However, pushing left, you can now access multiple weapon sets that you have equipped within your belt. Pushing to the right will open up a satchel where you can have different potions and foods ready for quick access. The L1 is now used to lock onto interesting sights you run across or respond to villagers who make comments about your appearance.
Are you alright? You look like someone gave you a thrashing.
Don't worry, nothing's wrong.
It's also how you can command Mutt, and you can access trader inventories without having to go through their dialogue tree. Within combat, L2 is now used to block, while R2 is the solo attack button. If you want to stab, you'll have to aim down on the 4-point star, while R1 is now used to unlock from opponents during combat, making it much easier to switch between opponents. R1 is also the button used when you're in stealth and want to throw a rock. Triangle is still used to call your horse, or can be held down to call your dog, and X is still the action button, which is what you use to speak to NPCs or pick up certain items. However, square now instead draws the weapon that you have within your belt. Meanwhile, circle is the new jump button, and sprinting is now done by clicking down on the left thumbstick, and crouching is done by pushing down the right. Overall, I like the new layout, but it does take a little bit of getting used to at the start. What? Oh, shit. I pushed L1, which is the block on the old game, rather than L2. Outside of the new controls, as I said, the real feeling of this game is everything just feels so much smoother. One thing I noticed right away is within the alchemy minigame, whereas in the first game, it felt like each action you did forced you into a position you didn't want to be and you were constantly having to make minor adjustments to grab the right ingredient. Now Henry's head actually feels independent from his body, so everything just feels more natural and easier to access. It's really hard to describe, but you'll know it when you feel it. Now moving into the combat, it flows quite nicely, and much like the start of the first where Henry isn't much good, through training, exploration, and encounters, you actually get better. I love the way it feels, and you get the sense that each weapon is truly unique. The combat feels different when using an axe as opposed to something like a longsword. One massive change regarding combat is the Master Strikes. You can now only pull off a Master Strike if you have either a short or a long sword equipped, but that goes for opponents as well. If you find yourself fighting some peasant with a woodcutter's axe, you can be a bit more aggressive and not have to worry about each one of your attacks just being countered. However, against skilled opponents using swords, the Master Strike is also more predictable, since in order to pull it off, you must attack in the opposite direction of your opponent during the timing window of a perfect block. So if your opponent has his weapon opposing yours, you are in danger of receiving a Master Strike, but as long as you don't attack from that direction, you're safe. It really is a fascinating way to make you treat each combat encounter with its own unique challenge instead of just laying back and countering everything like you did in the first. I tend to find myself being a lot more aggressive against anyone not using a longsword, since I know I won't just get Master Struck and have more opportunities to find openings. Now, as far as ranged combat, the bows and crossbows also feel much different and are much easier to access for new players. While you still don't get a crosshair, I didn't find myself ever struggling to find a spot on the screen where the arrow might go. Instead, you can pretty much line up the target with the tip of the projectile, and after compensating for arrow drop and sway, you'll hit your mark pretty consistently. Plus, the way these new bows and crossbows sound is simply phenomenal. The perk tree has also gone through a lot of changes, and while the main stats of strength, agility, vitality, and speech remain, a lot of the secondary skills have been combined to make them all flow together a bit smoother. For example, herbalism and hunting have been combined into a single tree called survival, and lockpicking and pickpocketing were combined into making thievery. Within the combat tab, I'm also happy to say that marksmanship, polearms, and unarmed have all received their own separate skill trees. And these are now legit skill trees that have perks rather than building towards combos you may or may not use. Combos, on the other hand, can be learned from skilled trainers around the map and correspond to which weapon and shield combination you may be using. Now, while each animation is unique depending on the weapon you use, they mostly follow the same types of movements. For example, the lower left strike and the lower right strikes have the same input across all the weapon types, being a simple left right left or vice versa to pull off. I definitely wouldn't say this simplifies combat in any way, since you still have to find the openings in your opponent to pull these off, but at least you're no longer having to do trigonometry trying to remember 10 different combo inputs. Now, as far as the perks themselves, this has been up from the 181 perks available within the first game all the way up to 275, with hidden perks along the way as well, so there could be many more. The skills themselves also level in ways that make more sense. For example, you can level your strength by walking around overburdened, since that requires a lot of strength, and you can level your thievery skill by selling merchants stolen goods. It just feels like everything flows together a lot better, and it's also a nice little surprise when you're hauling off all your ill-gotten goods to the merchant and pick up a strength perk along the way. Along with skill game making more sense, there's also touches throughout the gameplay that make more sense too. For example, bandits now actually carrying the keys to their chest, so even if you're not a good thief but a good warrior, you can kill everyone at the bandit camp and still unlock their chest even if you're not so good at lockpicking. It's little touches like this that make it feel like Warhorse really thought of everything and accommodate for all sorts of different playstyles. Now, as I briefly touched on earlier, the alchemy minigame comes back, but there have been some small changes to make everything make more sense. Boiling is now easier to do by simply putting the cauldron down into the fire rather than pulling the bellows multiple times, and while some potions can be made by not following the recipe, there's actually a big incentive to stick as close to the recipe as possible by way of potion tiers. The closer a recipe is actually followed, the more powerful the results will be in the end, and the more the potion will be worth. Now, while a weak marigold decoction will still heal you, it'll only give you 15 points of health back over the course of 1 minute, as opposed to a strong one giving you 40. And if something does go wrong with a potion, Henry will audibly say what you did wrong so you can improve for the next time.
I didn't boil those nettles long enough, did I?
Farkle is mostly unchanged as far as the game itself, but it has been added too. All the same loaded dice can still be collected all over the map, but depending on how much you bet will impact what a winning score is. For example, betting with poor peasants for only 3 groschen will require only 1500 points to win, whereas betting with an experienced gambler for 50 groschen will have the game last till 3000. There's also Farkle badges that give unique buffs within the game, and if you and your opponent have matching tiers, you can choose to play using badges and have a chance to win their badge if they lose. They range from tin to silver to gold and can drastically improve the trajectory of any given game. Now, blacksmithing is interesting, and I'll start off by saying I've been absolutely loving it, but I already know this is going to be divisive. If you like the way the game treats the alchemy, you'll absolutely love this as well. If not, you're going to think this is the worst thing ever. First, you'll need to acquire schematics through the blacksmiths or the open world. Then you'll need to gather the materials, which can either be bought at traders or found in birds' nests or chests. Once getting all the required goods, you can craft a sword, horseshoes, axes, and a few other miscellaneous things. Start by heating up the material to a bright yellow and hammer away on the different parts with a steady rhythm. If you're doing it right, Henry will start to whistle in accordance to the speed of your hammering technique. As you're hammering, you'll need to move the material around so everything gets hit evenly, and while this is fairly easy to do for axes and swords, since axes have a large surface area and swords can only be moved up and down, horseshoes can be problematic. They're a very small piece and it has 4 ways of movement, so the likelihood of you missing is actually pretty high, but as long as you do small hits and only move the piece little by little, you shouldn't have a problem. But, like anything, it takes time to get used to, and I know this is something you're either going to love with all your heart or hate and never touch. Just know that it does have that warhorse touch that makes something feel meaningful when it's done right, so take that however you want. And while it's not necessarily a minigame, there's been a lot of quality of life touches to the repairing and cooking system, allowing you to group lumps together so it doesn't feel like such a chore. If you have a lot of items to cook at a cooking pot, you can cook them all at once, or if you have a lot of items to repair, you can select the entire group, and up top it shows you if the current repair kit can even handle the repair and how much life it'll have once the repair is done. Simply put, this game is massive. I've sunk almost 30 hours into it so far, and I think I've done a grand total of maybe 5 main story quests and dozens of side quests, and I still don't feel like I've even scratched the surface of everything available. Each quest and random encounter feels unique, and I don't think even after 100 hours I'll have seen everything that there is to offer. The map is absolutely filled with NPCs giving you tips on where you can find interesting sites, quests, shops, taverns, and activities. The quests themselves are rich and deep, making you really question your moral choices and have you thinking back on whether or not you did the right thing. This is a game that can easily have you audibly laughing out loud with the dialogue choices made by one quest and then into a stunned silence while you listen to the story of a father losing his newborn baby.
They could see right off it was a boy. Like I said, only Yaroslav came out feet first.
The weight of your choices, for better or worse, is also felt in the quest conclusions. There was one quest in particular. I was investigating a kidnapping and a farmhand named Straw was guilty. After placing him under arrest and turning him over to the bailiff, I then visited the town a couple of in-game days later, only to find his corpse swinging from a nearby tree. Now, I'm happy to say there's also a quest that involves drinking with some unlikely allies that had me laughing and smiling for almost its full 1 hour duration, and it really is what I would consider to be a worthy successor to the Father Godwin quest of the first game.
Elves all hate to hit a cat.
But the quests are only half the story because the random encounters you can find are just as interesting. Often traveling across the map, you can run into all sorts of bandits and wayfarers that beckon you over. Sometimes groups of caravans will stop for a rest at a nearby camp, or someone will just want to play dice or tell you about a hidden treasure that's just up the road. But it's not just the events, but it's the delivery itself that sets these apart. One that stands out to me was when I ran across a wayfarer that called me over for a chat. He told me he was celebrating the birth of his first son, but something about him just felt shifty. He seemed rather old to be having his first son and insisted that I have a drink with him to celebrate. After not having a good feeling about it, instead I reject him, in which case he tried to fist fight me, and upon losing, he ran away only for me to put an arrow in his back to find that he had a lullaby potion in his inventory, most likely meant to be used against me to steal all my stuff. I don't really want to give too much away, but just trust me when I say I could give 10 of these random encounters that I've so far run across away and don't think I'd even cover 1% of all that are available. Now, performance. This was actually rather shocking. I've been running this game in 4K ultra settings and it has been extremely stable. Now I will say that I do have a 14900K and a 4090, but I'm also recording on 2 different sources to capture this footage, and I haven't seen any frame drops below 70, usually sitting between 75 and 90 FPS, even in the most dense towns and villages. Now I should mention this is all within the Trotsky region, so I haven't made it out to Kutenberg yet, but I would honestly be surprised if that changes. Everything on the map seems stable, and apart from 1 or 2 visual bugs, I can honestly say that this massive game is pretty much bug-free. The worst one I really encountered almost 30 hours into the game froze in the loading screen of one side quest, but the autosaves are frequent enough that it maybe set me back a grand total of 5 minutes. And yes, if anyone's curious, the bushes are no longer impenetrable objects of doom. Instead, there's a cool animation where Henry slowly walks through thick brush, but I've yet to encounter any that have been solid objects. Now, while I have loved everything up to this point, there is 1 or 2 things worth mentioning that I'm not a huge fan of. First is the way the sorting of the new inventory system, which is a bit annoying since you can move to the pages by using the left thumbstick, but it's also the same way that you open descriptions to learn more about stats of certain items, so it's very easy to try to open the description and accidentally flip over to the next page. It just feels a little annoying, and it feels like this could be fixed. This is particularly annoying when trying to read the nourishment value of food items, so you scroll over for the description, your character's nourishment value disappears, so you have to scroll back and forth to find a food item that won't overstuff you. It's a similar situation with the map when you're learning more about quest details, but then the map just becomes this little window that you have to scroll back and forth to. None of these really take away from the experience of the actual game, but it's something that I noticed right from the start, and it really hasn't gone away after 30 hours. Other than that, there seems to be a small bug with an exit save that can completely distort the character faces for about a minute, and minor flickering in some parts, but all of these were already addressed in the review code given by Warhorse and should pretty much all be gone by a day 1 patch, so most of you won't even see this, but given this is my first impressions, I wanted to address it. But overall, the feeling you should really take away is for a game world this massive to have that few things wrong with it on a pre-release version is nothing short of a miracle, especially given how buggy the first one was at launch and even 6 months later. It's really easy to see that Warhorse did a lot to make sure the stability was there, and after playing it for as long as I have, it's very clear to me why Warhorse was so confident to give these codes out over a month before launch, because they know they truly have something special on their hands.
Die!
And that was my preview and first impressions of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. I'll have much more comment on KCD2 in the coming days, so make sure you give this video a like and comment down below what you're most looking forward to when this game releases. A massive thank you to PlayOn and Warhorse for giving me early review code, and as always, I'll see you all in the next one.